Hello, if you are a frequent visitor of Vista, then you know the rules. I have a little conversation with Mr. Sterling here, and you can interrupt whenever you choose. It's suitable for you, then you can just raise your hand and ask any question. It does not need to be related to the topic we are discussing. You can ask about his ideas about what in general, you can ask about specific books here. You can ask about anything. And when time's up, then better show me a sign. And I try to take note of that. In your columns, Mr. Sterling, you sometimes mention music. You seem to be a music fan also. And what I want to say for the start is that the communities you are seeing shaping up in literature, they are actually being common in music for a long time, much longer than it's visible now in literature. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So another thing is that you were once asked about the situation, the milieu of today's science fiction writing, the exact topic you elaborated just some time back. And you were once asked, and you compared those two eras when you started writing in the late 70s and established yourself as a writer in the 80s. You said that nowadays you need to be, when you are a science fiction writer, you need to use all media, TV, blogosphere, everything. It's not just writing, sitting at home and writing a book. And this is exactly what you are doing, I suppose, now. Can it be confusing, and how do you elaborate on this situation? Using media, being part of the media scape.
Right. Well, I'm quite a student of media, and I'm very interested in extinct media. So if you go onto my blog, you can see that I'm keenly aware of media dying. And we're in a period where media is dying really fast. And new media tends to die faster than old media. Because there's a brief youth span where things tend to just perish. But it's kind of not, if you look at the history of genre writing, and especially if you look at national literatures, you can see that there's always a technical infrastructure that supports them. For instance, American TV was globally dominant for a long time, but it wasn't because Americans write better theater or better plays than anybody else. It was because Americans had better cameras than anybody else. They just had better lighting, and they had a larger national market. So you have to be aware of the actual structural underpinnings of these things. And it's not that, oh, you need to learn TV, and you need to learn movies, and you need to learn to play music, and you should also be an actor, and you should be theater. That will spread you too thin. What you need to do is understand that all media have certain commonalities, and there are areas and times and places where you can intervene very effectively and build an audience there of people who share your cultural sensibilities. And you need to stop worrying about, oh, I have to be the most famous guy who writes paperback originals in Britain. No, that's not what matters. What matters is are your ideas reaching people who react? Are you stimulating people's imaginations? And if you're too heavily involved in national publishing, you're going to be neglecting people around the real world who really understand you and really sympathize with you. Like, say, Brazilians. You shouldn't hesitate to make a video if that alerts Brazilians to what you're doing. If you take notice of a Brazilian musician nowadays and you say, this woman's music is really good, she must be a genius, she may very well write you email. She may become a personal friend of yours. She may alert you to things you knew nothing about. And it's foolish to turn that down because, oh, well, I don't deal with music.
When I read your writing in blogs and stuff you're doing, this non-fiction writing, you seem to be a writer that's really excited really often. What excites you? Do you sometimes feel bored? Of course, you can be excited about boredom also, but you pick up things everywhere and you are inspired about everything.
Well, I think what's going on there is that I actually have a personal blog. So it's only about things that I either like or hate. And I could have had a different kind of blog where I was a working journalist and sort of said, why don't you go every day and go write about internet policy, let's say. And that would have bored me eventually. And and it's why I've never been a professional journalist of like a beat writing about, say, computer crime. I know a lot about computer crime, but it's really boring. I mean, crime is horrible. It's like really interesting for about 18 months until you come to know a whole bunch of criminals personally. And then you realize that being a criminal, really, really boring, especially prison. Super, super boring in prison. Amazingly super boring, right? Like, not even go there. So, I reserve my blogs for either things that have caught my attention or things that make me angry. And I spend a lot of, my blog is quite cheerful, but I also spend a lot of time just insulting and assaulting injustices on my blog.
One sign that, one thing that works as a sign for excitement is that you have created some new words for people to use. Like spying is one of the most famous of them, and there are others. And I suppose people in the room also know them. What about those words? Why did they came up once, and why it's necessary to create them?
Well, I'm a writer, so of course I'm interested in words. And science fiction is traditionally a place where a lot of new language is invented, especially like personal names. Just people make up fake languages. Even fantasy has a lot of language play. But I actually learned this from Kevin Kelly, who was the editor of Wired magazine, who told me once that if I was looking for the news, I should look for places where new language was being invented and where it seemed that people did not know what they were talking about. And when you don't know what you're talking about, it's not merely a sign of ignorance or confusion. Often it's a sign that nobody has invented the words yet. They're just not there. So, listening to him, and I worked for Wired magazine, I still blog for Wired magazine, and I consider Kevin one of my gurus, really. This trained me to listen for language breaking down, or language doing odd things, or language collapsing, or just showing semantic oddities. And after many years of listening, I just got a very sensitive ear for it. And now I listen to it, and yes, I make up words, but more often I publicize words that somebody else has made up.
You just spread them.
Yes, and I spread them deliberately. I mean, when I see that there's a hole that needs to be patched over, or a verbal bridge that needs to be made to sort of get us over the river to solid ground, then I don't hesitate to make up a new word.
So you read something and some word and say, yes, that word, exactly that word was absent before.
Exactly, yes. Well, people sometimes call them buzzwords. And there's always criminal jargon, argot of various kinds, pidgin language. I have a whole category on my blog where I keep up with such things. But really the internet has been a huge language generating machine. If you just go and look at the way people talk on Twitter, you can see that every language has been strongly affected by electronic means of expression. They all have the SMS compressions, they all have the weird abbreviations, they all have the neologisms, CPU, RAM. What did that mean? Wireless, mobile, these are all new words that have appeared. Virtual this, augmented that, ubiquitous this. They're real terms, they won't last forever, but they're just like the words of our time.
Any questions?
Yes, this microphone.
You take this one.
Yeah.
So what you were just saying about it reminded me of something that I once wrote in a thesis that Brooke here opposed. Now, cyberpunk, obviously something that you're very well known for, is often, I guess, said to be one of the more accurately predictive forms of science fiction. And over the recent decades, there's been a lot of things which have developed, which have been predicted by prior cyberpunk novels. Would you say it's justifiable to believe that a lot of these things were not so much predicted as their inventors read about them and then grew up and decided to build them? The things that they read about as kids?
It's a very complex matter. Of course, nobody genuinely predicts things in the sense that you mean. But, us cyberpunk writers are very, very keen on this. And we're very, very aware of the passage of time and sort of how new ideas appear and old ideas are crushed. And so, you can read a William Gibson novel from the early 1980s, and it does read kind of a lot like a situation in the late 1990s. But nowadays, you can read a William Gibson novel like Zero History, and it's full of cyberpunk science fiction riffs, none of which are fiction. I mean, every technology that's in that book, and there's lots of weird technologies, all kinds of strange gadgets, gizmos, situations, they're all real, right? They all really exist in contemporary society, it's just that most people haven't heard of them yet. So, that's not a work of prediction, but it still has a very, wow kind of, William Gibson sensibility to it. You don't even have to make up things in order to write work with that kind of sensibility. We proved that when we were writing steampunk work, which is, speculative work set in the past. Who predicts the past? You can't predict the past, but you can retro-dict the past, and you can do all kinds of verbal tricks with it. When people come to me and say, oh, when I was a young guy, I read your book, and now I've built the thing, and it's here in this box, that happens pretty often, actually. But it's never what I said. It's always what he read, right? And he's like, he read that, and it really stimulated his imagination, and he's like, okay, now I'm going to build it, and now I'm going to show the author. It's not, words on a page are not real objects and services, okay? Really manufacturing things, even a piece of software is very difficult. So I've learned to be very polite about that. So if somebody comes in and says, yes, I built this absurd thing and I patented it, and, Bruce Sterling predicted it, I'm not going to tell him no. It would only hurt his feelings. It doesn't help. Right? Even predicting things doesn't help very much, to tell you the truth. You can predict things very easily. You can tell a 5-year-old girl, you know what? Someday you're going to be a grown woman and you'll really like boys. And she's like, what? Under no circumstances. Boys, they're my enemy. I hate them. Okay. You're an adult and she's just a little kid. And she's going to forget the prediction anyway. And it's just really obvious. But that was a factual prediction. It works all the time. It's not very hard. The easiest way to predict something is to just tell something they don't know. That's true. If they don't know it's true and they heard it from you, it sounds like you predicted it. There's no other way. There's no way to tell. There's no way where you can sort of say, oh, Bruce Sterling predicted this or he didn't. There's no prediction board. There's no legal thing. I'll never be sued for being right or wrong.
So, you said a very interesting thing about, obviously very true about Zero History having no technology that doesn't currently exist. So, is it perfectly okay for cyberpunk to not be science fiction?
Well, someday we'll all be dead. And our work is going to be historical writing. And, I hope that people still find our work of interest. And I don't find that frightening. We're all embedded in time. Just because you're ahead of your time in 1975 doesn't mean you're ahead of your time forever. That's not what it's about, right? First of all, it can't be done. And second, there's really no satisfaction in it. The satisfaction comes in sort of being engaged with it. And sort of seeing it happen and kind of drawing it out and maybe helping other people to see it. You can do that on large scales or small scales, or in one society or in another society. It's a kind of craft, you know. But it's not about always being ahead of your time. It's not hard, or, you know, it just doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
Hi. On your blog, you've been discussing the concept of cyber warfare, and as much as I've read it, you've been downplaying it. So I was just wondering whether, in light of the new or recent incidences where there have been Trojans found in Predator drones, computers, and stuff like that. Do you still, and I mean the decidedly low-tech, like Afghan insurgents are actually hacking into the video streams sent back by the drones. Do you still kind of think that cyber warfare is not all it's made up to be?
Well, yes and no. I mean, my problem is that I've heard thousands of stories like that. So, you know, yeah, I'm a skeptic. Because the day doesn't go by when I don't get swarms of panicky email about some terrifying and mostly imaginary threat. And, you know, there are a lot of real threats. And there are, you know, things that are pretty much real war. And there's certainly a lot of state-supported cyber activity going on, which is intended to do other people military, economic, and political harm, like the Syrian Electronic Army taking over the AP feed on Twitter and announcing that President Obama had been wounded in a bomb attack. That caused like an instant stock market panic in the US. Stocks just went off a cliff for about 2.5 minutes before it was revealed that this was a deliberate hoax by agents of the Syrian government. Okay, that's a pretty cool prank. And, you know, I don't doubt that those members of the Syrian Electronic Army got a medal from the regime for, you know, pulling this particular stunt. But the business about the Afghan drone thing just doesn't matter very much. I mean, even if they take over a few drones, so what? Drones crash in Afghanistan all the time. It's not like they're counterattacking with drones inside Washington, D.C. That would be really interesting, right? The thing you're describing here is sort of 95% hacker rumor. It's the kind of thing that guys on 4chan think is cool. It's not the kind of thing that like people in the Pentagon think is cool, right? If you want to read what people in the Pentagon think is cool, you should be reading like threat level, you know, danger room. Well, you know, these guys are professional journalists. They actually know what they're talking about. And they're more dismissive of most cyber war rumors than I am. I mean, you know, the problem is that like people in the business of spreading rumors about cyber war, most guys who are into cyber war are members of the intelligence services. They just lie all the time. That's their job.
Actually, both the cases I mentioned come from David Axe's threat level blog.
Well, yeah, I know that there are people listening to drone unencrypted transmission. You know, that isn't news. That's been around for a long time. That's just not really cyber war. I mean, cyber war is, well, even guys attacking Estonia wasn't super cyber war, because that was just a bunch of, you know, crypto kids with a bunch of botnets, Russians mostly, showing up and just hammering your services. There are botnet attacks now that are 100 times bigger than that. They don't even get press, because the machines are 100 times bigger than they were. But, you know, it is very much the kind of stuff that happens. And there's tons of cyber espionage. Jesus, the Chinese are all over the place. Ghost Rat, you know, Rube Unit 61668 or whatever. But they're spooks. They're members of the Chinese intelligence service. Sometimes they do things and other times they just lie about it in order to panic people. You know, and if you get easily panicked, you just add into an atmosphere of unfocused terror that we really had plenty of. I mean, you know, how long are we supposed to be scared? It's just boring to be that scared all the time. It just seems silly.
Do you think the plot of Charles Strauss's Rule 34 will actually happen, or has it happened already?
Well, you know, I don't doubt there are guys in the intelligence services who read Strauss. And that's kind of spooky. You know, there are guys in the National Reconnaissance Office who read my books. The guys in the NSA were big Sterling fans. Have you ever read Zenith Angle? That's like me talking to my fans in Washington, D.C. who are all spooks and like military guys. And yeah, a lot of them are science fiction people, especially the NSA. They're all math guys. So, you know, it's not that they're far away from us. Why am I lecturing Estonians about intelligence services? You guys know more about this than probably anybody in the world. But, you know, we Americans have them too. We've got lots of spies. Lots and lots. Lots and lots. And boy, do they have hardware. They've got awesome hardware. They got hardware like you wouldn't believe. They had hardware 30 years ago that you wouldn't believe today at the NSA. They're fantastic. You should read Puzzle Palace. What's his name? Banville. Well, never mind. It would only depress you to know how much intelligence work there was in American society. But, you know, we weren't in the Cold War for nothing.
I was quite fascinated about I guess the main point of the speech about not targeting like big markets of science fiction rather than you know, trying to get published in Kazakhstan or I guess that was something like what you said.
Yeah.
I think I'm quite fascinated about it, but I'm just wondering how that would work, because I guess the two writers, the two women writers, I'm not sure if you can like, they're not very weird books. They're basically bourgeois novels with some extra accessories. And if you write some really weird stuff coming from a really weird country and try to do something in Kazakhstan, how do you think it's gonna work out?
Well, it's not going to be easy. And I agree with you that, you know, Stephanie Meyer and J.K. Rowling are not, you know, Stendhal and Tolstoy. They're just popular writers who managed to hit the nerve. But what else do we have? I mean, there are other groups like sort of, you know, state-supported translation bureaus and cultural Goethe Institute kind of guys who are like have budgets to go out and do kind of well-meaning cultural exchange things. And they've never made any difference, really, to anybody. I mean, what good have they, especially for people in science fiction, who wouldn't even know how to ask for a grant. And then you've got a guy like Lavi Tidar, who's got zero budget, lives in Israel, and he's like done more for international publishing and making science fiction writers in obscure countries aware of each other than any 50, you know, federally supported cultural exchange organizations. He's got zero budget. You know, why don't you go hang out with him and see if he can help you out? And I will warn you, he's not a pleasant guy. He's not even a charming man. He's actually kind of a mean-tempered character. But, you know, at least he knows what he wants, and he gets up in the morning and he does it every day, and he doesn't make any excuses for the situation. So I praise him for that.
Any more questions? Okay, maybe later. The question about the predicting future came up, and William Gibson's name was also mentioned. William Gibson has said, if I remember correctly, that the future is not as exciting anymore as the present is. The present is where the real stuff's going on. And maybe, for me it seems it's maybe a bit sad that we maybe have ceased to think about big utopian things about future. Well, it's nice to be excited about the present things, but still, can it be sad also, or is it okay?
Well, you know, I guess the proper term there would be ambivalence. You know, I'm all for people being excited about their prospects, especially if they're 19 years old. But, you know, to want to be 19 years old in spirit forever is quite foolish. And in the long run, the future is where we go to die. We're mortal beings. And, you know, so you need to, like, keep that prospect in your head. I mean, the future is not inherently your friend. The future is just a form of history that hasn't happened yet. So, we cyberpunks are quite famous for this. We're always coming up with these atemporal pronouncements like, the future's already here, it's just not well distributed. A good old-fashioned future, zero history in art. We're very time-aware writers. But, the future isn't just shiny, new, big things occurring. It's also like important, valuable things going away. And they do go away. I mean, you lose things as time goes on. You lose your parents. You lose, your first love. You lose your youth. You lose the things you used to value. It doesn't matter how hip you are. You can go to your show at your local museum here, which is full of Estonian hippies. I love that show, by the way. Totally dig it. The system hippies. Love those guys for decades. They're all mourning about their plastic LPs. It's like, man, I had an original Apple Beatles LP. I was the coolest guy in Estonia. Like, people would show up with Soviet magnetic tape to tape my original Beatles MP. Girls kissed me on the face because I had Led Zeppelin 3. Okay, that's gone, right? Who cares what the guy's got the plasticware? You just download it, either from Apple or off a torrent site. You just find the MP3. Okay, that was the future, right? And that was a loss, am I right? Are you going to cry about it? You can have all the Beatles you want. You can eat Led Zeppelin stacked this high. Janis Joplin's dead. She was really exciting for 2 years. She died young. They buried her. She's gone. Right? So these are people who were super excited. I mean, if you were like a hippie in Estonia in 1967, it's like, wow, everybody's gone crazy. Look at that girl with flowers in her hair. Okay. Those are exciting times. Things like that will probably happen again. They've happened a large number of times. Thinking that it's always going to be like that is foolish, right? I mean, it's one thing to be enthusiastic, and it's another thing to be stupid, right? I mean, just don't be a sap.
Another thing you have mentioned when you're writing is the question how to make people live longer, how to prolong the life of the people. What about that topic is important to you? Why?
Well, it's a theme in my work, and it has to do with the engagement with time. It's like that's something that just really interests me as an author. It's like, what was it like, and what is it like now, and what is it going to be like in the future? And the only way you really get to see it is just to live, right? I mean, if you die young and beautiful, you don't know how it turns out. So if you could live longer, you'd be able to see more of it. And, I think I could easily live to be 300 years old. I wouldn't be bored for a day. There would always be something new and different and kind of exciting, and I'd be very pleased with myself. But there are situations where you really wouldn't want to do that. The thing that's interesting is that they're like hints that it might actually be possible. And, I've been studying longevity science for quite a while. And most of it's rubbish, but not all of it, I mean, they say there's like 6 or 7 major pathways of metabolic decline that actually cause your cells to get old and go away. I watch lab animals. If there's a mouse around that has 10 times or 100 times the normal lifespan of a mouse, we're going to be in big trouble. We've got mice that are like twice as long lived now. Maybe 3 times. You starve them, keep them cold, that kind of thing. If we start having mice or human cell cultures that live for extended lengths of time, we're going to go for it. Because people want it. They'll pay for it. And there's no reason not to do it. And if that happens, it'll just be a huge revolution. It'll just change everything, really. Probably won't happen in my lifetime. I'm not a singularitarian. I don't expect to live to be 400. But I don't think it's physically impossible. It's not like a time machine. There's nothing that violates the laws of physics about being a long-lived organism.
Is humankind ready for it?
Humankind's never ready for anything. We're not one thing. Some will die and new people will be born and they'll be more used to it. It's all right.
Any more questions?
Oh, the one in the back.
So I actually have two questions. First of all, you have, on numerous occasions already, you have identified yourself as a cyberpunk author. So I was just wondering if you started out thinking that I want to be a cyberpunk writer, or if you just wrote something and it just later on turned out that it was classified as cyberpunk.
Okay, that's question one, right.
Yeah.
Well, no, we didn't make up that neologism. That was actually tagged on us by Gardner Dozois, who was a science fiction editor. And he was the first guy to say, we have these people who are cyberpunk science fiction writers. So, myself and my closest friends, we didn't call ourselves cyberpunks, but we did call ourselves movement writers. And we were very much like into punk counterculture stuff. I mean, we were science fiction people with a very pronounced bohemian tinge. And so, we were perfectly aware that we were writing this kind of underground, hip dude kind of science fiction. But you don't get to choose what people call you, like being in the Fauves or the Beatniks. The Beatniks didn't choose the term beatnik either. It's just something that shows up in critical writing, and that's sort of what you get stuck with.
And my other question is whether you think that these days it's actually more beneficial for authors to try to write in some specific genres, or whether it would actually be better to try to mix things up.
I think you'd be better off with a genre than you are with a nationality at this point. Like if you want to be internationally famous, it's like more easy to be an internationally famous Goth than it is to be an internationally famous Croatian, let's say. Which is kind of weird, but that's just typical of kind of contemporary culture. And I think the victory condition there would be to invent something like surrealism, let's say, that doesn't really have a national identity, but is sort of just inherently kind of, and then be able to ally yourself with like some kind of generational or sensibility movement and kind of go with that. Like, cyberpunk's very Canadian, but steampunk's pretty international. I mean, steampunk's really pretty global. There's like Brazilian steampunks, Polish steampunks, Italian steampunks. I mean, there's a lot of steampunks in areas where nobody ever cared about cyberpunk. So if you could invent something like that, it's like, I don't know, a movement, a genre, a treatment or something, and kind of spread it laterally, that might be a very successful means of cultural intervention at this point. I mean, if I were a young person, I'd be tempted to give that a try.
He's not universally liked, but was Jean Baudrillard's writing influential? He's mentioning that one kind of science fiction is over and now a new kind of science fiction arrives. Was it influential on you, for example?
Well, I happen to be very sympathetic to postmodern writers, and I even wrote this weird book, Zeitgeist, which has a lot of jokes in it about French postmodern and structuralist theory. Because I always thought there was something very science fictional about it, and I thought they'd make kind of great fantasy elements. But the problem is, if you call yourself postmodern, the time just keeps on ticking, and eventually you're like old postmodern, new postmodern, and you just end up as crushed as the modernists were. It's just like, oh, that's old-fashioned, that's very 90s postmodern. And Baudrillard's dead, and he is getting kind of old-fashioned. I mean, I still read him. I think he was kind of a cool writer, better than people think. And I appreciated his awareness of science fiction, that he would quote Ballard, Bradbury, His book, Cool America, is a very good book about America. It's got practically no Americans in it.
He's another writer who's pretty excited about stuff.
Yeah, Cool Memories, that's a really good book. People think he's like this bitter, crazy 68er guy. I never found him that way. I think I never talked to him, but I think, I could have been a pretty good friend of his if we'd had the chance to sit down and talk. He seems like quite a sympathetic character to me. I kind of understand where Baudrillard was coming from, and I appreciate his efforts. I'm a fan.
Anything else? you want to ask? It's about right now to ask. Okay, another topic that comes up regularly in your writing is climate change and ecological catastrophe. Well, can you elaborate on that too?
Well, did you notice how hot it was today?
It was really cold 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, sure. Try this summer. It's really hot, like crazy hot, like North Pole melting hot. It shouldn't be this hot in your country. It shouldn't be having weather like this. It's not a speculative thing, you know, it's an existent fact.
What about some scientists saying that actually there's no such problem, that this is well fabricated?
They're lying.
There are such scientists in Estonia too. Actually, in the present time, when you want to be a science fiction writer, one thing you always have to have in mind is that science fiction and, well, fiction and non-fiction tend to mesh up all the time. You can't just be a stylist anymore. You must all the time have some crazy ideas, and they are bordering on real science. What about real science in your writing? How important is it to keep in touch with the so-called real science?
Oh, and early in my career, I was super keen on real science, you know, and I was very much in their camp. And, I was excited by science news. And then as I got older, I became more interested in design and architecture, because I just find them more sympathetic. They're kind of easier to write about. So, nowadays I write a lot of science fiction that's probably better described as design fiction. It's really about technology, objects, and services rather than, say, new physical laws being discovered. But I have very strong political allegiances to science, and I really resent it when scientists are politically attacked or subjected to Lysenkoist-style persecutions by political enemies. And as a metaphysician, I really think the scientific method is of supreme importance, and it's something I back all the way. I think it's just a great way to generate useful knowledge and sort of a true advance. So, I feel very kindly towards scientists. I have members of my own family who are scientists, and I'm happy to see what they are up to. But I have to say, I do not study them as much as I did. And, in a way that was kind of self-education. I mean, I didn't, when I was a young person, I didn't really know what mathematics was. I didn't understand physics very well. I wasn't familiar with some of the terms of biology and so forth. And I really needed to educate myself just in order to be basically literate. But, now I kind of know enough about it that I pay attention when they're doing something that's of paradigmatic difference. Like if something turns up in some field of science that seems to be disturbing the status quo, I get very interested.
To writing a novel, for example, do you need sometimes some kind of research, scientific research, to find out how can it be possible in physical terms?
I actually think that helps some. It's certainly not necessary. It even can get in the way. Like you're never going to be J.K. Rowling that way. Like you're not going to write this super best-selling book about a boy wizard because wizardry is obviously not scientific. But I think studying physics and understanding the constraints of physical reality actually stimulates the imagination. You can get a better fictional effect from confining yourself to what can really work. Because it's just less daydream-like, and there's just something more like real technology about it. It's just more convincing that way. It's certainly not necessary within the genre. And I write plenty of fantasy. I don't write stuff that is merely scientifically accurate. The one book I read that was the most scientific was the one where a female scientist is the love interest. And she's just like a character in a book who's she's the female lead, but she's also a scientist, and she's just super into it. She's really a kind of fanatically committed, serious, no kidding, Nobel level scientific researcher. And she was a really interesting character. And she just didn't behave like normal people did. I was just kind of a very intellectually bright top achiever person. And she was a good character for me. She kind of like lit up the page. I didn't know what she was going to do. You know, when she did really unusual things, they were just kind of a fun character to write. I kind of miss her. I should try that again, really.
To come back to the issue that you discussed previously about sort of national cultures and international writers, and the book about Turin that you showed, do you think that it's easier to produce a really successful description of a particular culture for a broad audience if you're observing it from the outside, in the same way that Cory Doctorow's Pirate Cinema that you mentioned is very much an English book about England, about Britain, but written by an international person, or by somebody who's from that culture very deeply, as, let's say, Stieg Larsson describing his own Sweden?
Stieg Larsson was a big science fiction fan. I don't know if you're aware of that, but Stieg was like super active in Swedish fandom in like the 70s and 80s. That's a sad story, Larsson. I don't know if you know much about him personally, but I really feel sorry for him. It's really kind of a shame what happened to him. I've heard that argued many different ways. And, obviously if you're a foreigner and you start writing about other people, there's always a chance you're going to take offense at something you said, because it's like insulting or demeaning or something like that. Or they might not even notice. Like, in the United States, nobody has ever heard of the German writer Karl May. You may know, maybe you've never heard of Karl May. In Germany, he's super famous. Yeah, well, he was he was huge in all the German-speaking countries. And he used to write about the United States all the time, mostly cowboys and Indians. And he would like make up fake American states that were full of made-up American tribes, and like made-up cowboys. And people just totally love this stuff. And to this very day, you go to my home, in Austin, Texas, and you see these German guys showing up, and they're like wearing the cowboy hats and the boots. They've all come there because they're like Karl May fans, right? It's like, oh yeah, I want to see like the German imaginings of this guy's artificial Texas, right? And there's something kind of great about that, actually. It's like there's this comic book in Italy called Tex, which is all about this Texan cowboy named Tex Willer. And he's this, he's a comic book superhero. He's got 6 guns and a hat, and he's always killing monsters and beating up Mexicans. There's nothing Texan about him. He's an Italian Texan. He's a spaghetti Western figure. But, I'm not insulted by that, even though I'm a Texan. I actually kind of identify with Tex and feel obscurely flattered. It's like, they think we're romantic. These Italians think us Texans are great. There's something touching about it. But then you can make the other argument, like, there's this guy, there's Dennis Mack Smith. He's a British historian. He's the greatest British historian in Italy. He's the greatest historian of Italy, really. He specializes in the 19th century and the Risorgimento. But really, he's the greatest scholar of 19th century Italian history. He's much better than any Italian. Like, vastly better. Even the Italians admit it. They're all citing it. They're like, he's defeated us. He's like, his research is more accurate. He understands what's going on. He's not misled by our fables. He's like, come in and he's actually telling the objective truth about what went on, whereas we Italians just lie to each other all the time, because, we're Italian. So, you can say, okay, well, that's great. Thank you, Professor Smith. Maybe that's kind of good. As a science fiction writer, I think you can write about other people's cultures. And I do kind of a lot of that. But I tend to write about their cultures in the past or in the future, and not in the present day. So I don't think I could write a short story set in present day Tartu and have it be a success. I just don't know enough. I don't know the names of the restaurants, I don't know the scandals, I don't know how people realistically behave. But I think I could probably write a pretty good story about Tartu in, say, the year 2111, right? Like a future Baltic Tartu. And like, say, some kind of futuristic Euro arrangement where global warming is set in, and a lot of Estonia is underwater, and there's like lots of Chinese guys in the Baltic, and there's like guys who are like, instead of having natural gas pipelines, they've got like these carbon sequestration pipelines. And then there's like this cool Estonian chick who's like come down from orbit because her mom was Russian and her dad was like this Latvian guy. And she's like returned to Tartu and she's like launching satellites from the Tartu. Okay, you can see me doing it, right? And it would sell and it would be pretty okay, I mean, it would be kind of weird if you were from Tartu, but it wouldn't be super weird if you just like, you noticed us, right?
Anyone else? By the way, Mr. Sterling, have you read the Russian, especially Soviet era Russian science fiction?
I used to read a lot of Soviet science fiction back in the day because they published tons of it in English. It was easy to get. I was living in India and we used to get lots of English language Soviet SF. Like a soft power outreach thing to Indians. So yeah, I was reading like Strugatsky's and all these guys.
Any impressions that you like them, or how are they distinctive from the Western model?
I'm drawing a blank on this guy. I actually like Yellow Arrow, Amon Ra. What the heck is that guy's name? Yeah. Okay, I kind of like Pelevin. I think like Pelevin's like a guy I kind of get where he's coming from. He's not well served by his translators. But some of his books are just top notch, and there's others that are just like a colossal mess.
That's not just the translators.
Well, okay, then, all right, then maybe he's just drinking a lot, during some, that would make sense. I've hung out with Russian people, I went to Moscow, I went to Petersburg, and, I've been to Russian science fiction conventions. I like the neo-academists, I don't know if they're still around. Wired sent me to St. Petersburg. I was hanging around with these digital art guys, Timur Novikov and people in his crowd in St. Petersburg. I don't know, well, that was like a decade ago. You probably don't remember any of these Petersburg characters, but they were of great interest to me. I really had to say that I learned a lot from that particular circle. They were very envious of the Baltic states in Petersburg, by the way. Most of these artists I was hanging out with, they wanted to be a Baltic state themselves. Really, they were serious. They're a strange bunch. Wonderful town, it's just very, very interesting place. As soon as I went there, I felt like I should hang out here, get a little writing done. But if I had, I'd be dead of alcoholism by now. That's what they're like.
What about time limits? Okay, ask some more things you want to ask.
I should ask the audience a question here. So, I'm like blogging people here because I've got this blog. Who should I be like telling people to read? It's like the really significant kind of Estonian voice of his generation figure. Here's your chance. It's like my blog's read by Brazilians. Chinese guys read my blog. Who deserves global attention on my blog from Estonia here? I don't even have to be a writer. Maybe you got like a pop musician or even a chair designer. I'm not fussy. Maybe you should think about it and send me some email if you can't just shout out his or her name. Okay, that's going to be those Skype guys again. I'm afraid these Skype entrepreneurs, the only people in Estonia that guys in my circle know anything about. They're famous.
If you asked Maniaki Tänav is quite a famous writer around here.
Well, does he deserve to be famous? I don't care if he is famous.
Yes, he does.
Okay, I'm not standing out. But don't be shy, just go ahead and send me some email. I'll be happy to figure this out.
What about your own impressions, for example, in the field of film? do they communicate some important stuff to you? For example, they do some futuristic movies today, even if it comes too easily in Hollywood. Once there was a time when science fiction movies were an important part of the communication in that kind of field. But is it now or is it over? Do you care about what?
Well, Iron Man 3 is going to earn Hollywood's budget this year. That may not be great cinema, but it's making just an absolute truckload of money. Right?
Yeah, okay, that's cool. But what about
unbelievable sums?
But what about the topics and?
It's about a guy in a rocket ship suit, and it was like the craziest comic book sci-fi notion in the world. Colossal success. It's crushing every other film out of Hollywood. It's about a guy who like has rockets in his feet, you know, and beats up gods with his hands. It's just a crazy movie if you look at it objectively, but just a colossal commercial success. Unbelievable. The amount of money that thing's going to make. The amount of money that was spent on it is unbelievable. I mean, I'm not a cinema guy. I don't even like going to movies. But I quite like special effects. In fact, I like special effects people. I tend to hang out with like coders. Code art, software art coding guys.
Can you explain why that have you did this special?
They're just more interesting. You know, a thing like Iron Man is for children. It's a comic book. You know, I'm interested in like actual kind of like what can you do with visuals? Like how can you like make things happen on a screen that never happened before? That's really interesting. So you know, processing is really interesting. Like the first software. Open source software deliberately designed by artists for artists. Processing super important. Really, really a new and interesting thing in the world. Arduino, super interesting. Control board, art control board for tech art installations. I could hang out with those guys all day. They're my best friends. I was a judge at Ars Electronica this year. I mean that's what I do. But I don't really watch. I mean, least of all, when I watch Hollywood films. I watch a lot of Bollywood films, because I used to live in India. So, I even interviewed a Bollywood star for the first time last year. That was so gratifying. I'm like calling up this guy, it was amazing. He was at the London Olympics. Like, so, your dad, ran into the torch. Yes, he did. My dad's the best actor we've got. Well, in Indian cinema, they're all related to one another. They have families, of clans. India's a very family-centered society, so all their movie stars are related to one another.
In terms of things that you should promote, I think the audience might start throwing heavy things at me, but there's a short Estonian film that's very, very descriptive and characteristic of Estonian culture that's also partly sci-fi. It's called Tulnukas, it's literally called Alien in Estonia. It is available online with English subtitles.
Is it on Vimeo?
Quite possibly.
YouTube?
Almost certainly.
Is it like obscene? NSFW kind of fair?
It's provisionally safe for work.
No. Okay, well, I might put it on the Tumblr then. I mean, sometimes Wired gets upset because they're Condé Nast, if I put on stuff that would set off spam filters. I mean, they themselves don't care. They're from San Francisco, but, it's all about Google's machinery, But yeah, I will certainly give that a look, and thank you for recommending it.
Anything else to ask?
In your speech, you mentioned that science fiction started about 70 years ago. But if you remember the great George Herbert Wells and these two great novels, Time Machine and War of the Worlds, they are many times filmed, and also other question about grand old lady Doris Lessing, who wrote this classical Archives of Canopus. What to say about this?
Well, I don't want to hurt your feelings here, but I actually wrote the Encyclopedia Britannica article on the history of science fiction. just before Encyclopedia Britannica crashed and like stopped printing the encyclopedias. So yeah, I know kind of a lot about the history of science fiction, like a humiliatingly large amount about it. I mean, you're kind of a crazy scholar on the subject. So, you know, there's all kinds of arguments about the first book that's a real science fiction book. There's like this awesome Swedish book about a guy who goes to the center of the earth and everybody is an upside down walking tree. And then there's the James Fenimore Cooper novel where they go to the North Pole and they go inside the earth and there's subterranean monkeys in there. I mean, that's probably the first American science fiction novel. But, you know, the term science fiction didn't actually come into use until the 1920s. And it was scientific fiction. And Wells never called his work science fiction. He said it was writing scientific romance, and he soon grew disenchanted with it. And Verne didn't call his work science fiction either. He referred to his work as extraordinary voyages, and he considered them to be mostly geography fiction. And, you know, the grand old lady is not Doris Lessing, it's Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, which Brian Aldiss very cogently argued was the first real work of science fiction in the world, specifically because it uses science to suspend disbelief. And then you go back and say, oh, well, there's the Lucretius and his early works of speculative physics, or there's the trip to the moon, which was carried out in the Greco-Roman days. Or you could even say, you know, back in the days of Mesopotamia, there's like all these legends of superheroes carry on. All right, the Bible's full of science fiction stuff. It's got the tabernacle, super miracles of various kinds. The Upanishads are older than the Bible. They've got like people starting the universe by milking snakes and using a cobra to turn the universe into cheese. You know, it's, you know, as a genre and really as an industry of which I'm a member, it starts in the 1920s. I don't really have not much to do with Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, but I've got plenty to do with Hugo Gernsback. And I won 2 Hugo Awards. I never won any Shelley Awards. So that's just how it is. I'd be happy to argue with you about it. Really, we could go on for years.
There's an interesting phase in the history of science fiction where, for example, science fiction movies intersected with horror movies. When it's similar to what Jean-Paul Riard said, that we are not safe in our bodies anymore. And the technology intersects with us, so we are not safe anymore.
Well, we weren't safe to begin with, you know, to tell poor Jean the truth there. He just smoked fewer cigarettes. Well, that was what did him in. It wasn't any invasive horror movie stuff. He didn't look after himself.
Okay, we're near the end, I think. Yeah, but I still leave room for at least one question if you are interested. Or maybe you can approach Mr. Sterling privately.
I'll plug some of my electronic stuff, you know, if you're like too shy to look. I have this blog on Wired, you can look it up, blogwired.com, blog.wired.com/Sterling. That's my blog Beyond the Beyond. It doesn't really have much science fiction in it. It's got lots of design, architecture, media history, politics, augmented reality, that kind of stuff. Futuristic trend spotting. And I'm big on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on Twitter. I have a closed account. But if you ask me to join and you don't have an egg account, you look like halfway decent, I'll let you join my Twitter account. And that's kind of like a personal news service. I'm pretty active on Twitter. And this year I started a Tumblr, which is like brucesterling.tumblr.com. So if you don't like English, you don't like to read a lot of stuff, you just like really weird pictures, bizarre photographs, strange diagrams. You can find a lot of that on my Tumblr. And it doesn't cost anything, and it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. So I like that about it. You know? You don't have to go talking to my publishers, you don't have to like buy books. You don't have to give me any money. I'm happy for you to see it. Enjoy yourselves. And thank you for being kind to us here in Tartu.
Thank you.